good stories for this week in music. May the 31st, in the year of 1976, I was there. The Who earned themselves a place in the Guinness Book of Records. The band officially became the loudest rock band ever in concert after their show at Charlton Athletic Football Ground in South London. The noise level topped 120 decibels. I was there with the legend that is Tommy Vance. And we were necking a few beers and enjoying The Who, and our ears were ringing for at least 3 days afterwards. It was amazing. Look at the 1st of June in 1975. Rolling Stones had a brand new guitarist. Ronnie Wood made his live debut with the band on that date, and the group began an American tour with Ronnie on his birthday in Louisiana. He'd been officially announced as Mick Taylor's replacement in April of that year. Here's Ronnie talking about what he remembers from that first ever gig.
Many chords and song arrangements going around in my head all at once, because I had about 300 song keys and arrangements going around on June the 1st in Baton Rouge, 1975, because that was my birthday. It was quite an initiation, really, because we'd been rehearsing at Woodstock, and Keith and I kept going. We slept about every 5th day and rehearsed all the rest of the waking hours.
Now, on to our main feature in the second hour of Sounds of the 70s, and it's Steve Jones, founder member and a great guitar player with the Sex Pistols. And this week saw the London premiere of a brand new biopic called Pistol. It was directed by Danny Boyle. The 6-part series is based on the memoirs of founder and guitarist Steve Jones. Steve now lives in Los Angeles, where he's been for over 3 decades. He was born in West London in the 1950s, right opposite the famous Hammersmith Odeon. The Sex Pistols exploded onto the music scene in 1976 with the help of Svengali manager Malcolm McLaren. Even though they only made one studio album, they changed the face of rock with their raw sound, chaotic live shows, and rebellious antics. I spoke to Steve recently and began by asking him what he thought of the musical landscape in the 1970s.
I think that the 70s was the best decade ever as far as music's concerned. You had so much different styles of music, and the fidelity of the 70s in the studios was, to me, the best sounding records, and nothing since has kind of matched it. You know, you got Bowie on one end, you got punk, you got disco, you got a lot of good R&B. I mean, it covers the whole gamut, the 70s.
So you're hanging around Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush, beginning in the 70s, and then you and Paul Cook formed this band called the Strand with a fella called Nightingale. He played guitar, did he?
Well, he did. He did, God bless him. It was me, him, and actually prior to that, there was 2 other guys, a guy called Stephen Hayes and Jimmy Mackin. That was the first attempt of putting a band together with Cookie and me. They slowly fell by the wayside when it got more serious, and me, Cookie, and Wally were the ones who stuck in there. I was singing at the time, and it wasn't my bag at all, but I couldn't play any instruments, and Cookie could barely play drums. Wally knew a few kind of Faces riffs, and then, you know, Glenn came into the picture because we used to, he was a Faces fan, but we used to work in the sex shop on King's Road, so that's how that little unit started. That was really the first thing where we actually rehearsed, you know, and actually did one gig that I can't remember a thing about because I was out of it because I was so nervous. I just couldn't handle it.
Wow.
It's in the new series, all that stuff.
Yeah.
On this, you know, Pistol.
So how did you graduate to the sex shop in Chelsea, to Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood?
Well, I was always down the King's Road because I like walking up and down it, just doing nothing, probably nicking or just being seen or whatever I was doing. I had a few phases down King's Road. It's so crazy because it was just about, I was trying to put out images to people. one week I'd be like the manager of Poco, you know, holding a suitcase with long hair and like a Hawaiian shirt. It's so ridiculous because no one was paying any attention to me. But in my mind, I had a movie going on in my mind, even back then as a kid, you know. But I was always gravitated to the sex shop, Let It Rock, as when I first went in there. And it was a place you could hang. I connected with Malcolm, and it wasn't like all the other shops at the time. I don't know how old you are, John, but back then there was these shops called Take Six, you know, with the kipper ties and all the flares and all the suits. And you was just not invited in there at all. So, you know, Malcolm's shop was amazing for urchins like me.
So when did talk of starting a band or renaming your band, the Sex Pistols, start?
Well, when Malcolm got involved, he knew we were rehearsing. I tried to get him down, you know, to come and see us. And he eventually came down. And Nick Kent was down there one time. I think it could have been the same time, like jamming with us. And after he saw us, you know, Wally, me, Cookie and Glenn was like the only real musician, I would say, adequate musician. We were okay. You know, I wasn't playing guitar at this point, and Wally could, you know, he was decent. And I guess he just saw that it wasn't happening. Even though we did a gig, he just saw it. He said, you know, you should get off singing and play guitar. And I was more than happy to do that, even though it was going to be a challenge to learn how to play guitar. But I guess it was suited in that way. But it was a relief not to be the front guy.
How come Malcolm had got himself a Gibson Les Paul from the New York Dolls?
I think it was. I think they owed him some money, apparently.
And then, what do you do for amplifiers and stuff? Equipment was expensive.
I could never have afforded it on my budget.
Yeah, so you go around backstage to the Hammersmith Odeon?
It's all in the show, buddy.
Yeah, but we can tease toward the show.
Yeah, well, that's definitely in there. Most of the questions you've asked me, in fact, are pretty much all in the show.
But basically, yeah. you nicked some equipment off David Bowie.
I did, although, on hindsight, nothing was taken from David Bowie. I thought it was, but now I realise when I know what equipment was, that the microphone, the only thing I got from Bowie, which had his lipstick on it, probably wasn't his. It was probably whoever the sound company was recording it. I didn't know what recording was or anything. The only equipment I personally took was the bass player's Sun amp and Woody Woodman's cymbals, and the rest of it was recording equipment, I think.
Let's play some Sex Pistols, UK, and soon there's to be a 6-part miniseries on TV called Pistol, based on the life of my guest Steve Jones. Amazing energy and power when you hear that. You know, when you recorded it in the studio, the Nevermind the Bollocks album, did you realise you had something really good?
To me, it was great. It seemed different, but again, it just sounded like rock and roll to me. So, you know, I put everything into that. I was never, none of us were ever messed up when we recorded it. You know, we were doing it regular hours, as far as I remember. And I personally, me, spent a lot of time with Chris Thomas and Bill Price to experiment on, you know, different guitars, sounds and bits and bobs throughout, especially Anarchy. There's a few guitars coming in and out. There's never, a lot of people think there's like 20 guitars on each track. It's not. There's 2 rhythm probably, and a little bits here and there. Solo different than the second solo in Anarchy. The phaser. That was probably the happiest time for me being in the Pistols, was that period making that album. I loved it in the studio doing that record.
Now, around the time Malcolm McLaren was sitting at a desk in front of Buckingham Palace, I remember signing deals with A&M Records. Then it was Virgin, then it was the EMI. And each time, of course, he signed, there was a chunk of money coming his way. Did you ever see any of that? What happened to it?
I don't know. You better ask Malcolm. I actually have a podcast right now where that interview is on right now. I'm going to do about 4 old interviews that I did on a radio station. I started in Indy, and this week is Malcolm, which is a really funny interview. A lot of people have never heard it. Next week, I think, is Chrissy Hine, and then Tony Wilson, and then Rotten. I think it's in that order. I could be wrong. You just got to check it out on a Monday.
It's called Jones's Jukebox, and the podcast, a new edition, comes every Monday. You get it wherever you get your podcasts. Did you have Cliff Richard as a guest?
One of the best interviews ever. He was so great. It was amazing, really, because I ran into him in a restaurant in LA, and I went up to him and said, "Listen, I've got this radio show. Do you want to come on it?" And he looked at me like I'm some nutcase. He didn't know me from Adam. I gave him my number, and he must have looked round to see, oh, okay, it's a decent radio, and he wanted to come on. He brought his guitar. I had my buddy Naveen Andrews come on there too, and I couldn't get rid of him, and I couldn't shut him up. It was brilliant. We played, his early 50s stuff, which was a real buzz for me because I was a fan of Cliff. I love them movies. They're so innocent, all of the his movies with the shadows. And that was a real highlight for me, having him on there.
Now, the album Nevermind the Bollocks is released. The BBC refuses to play God Save the Queen. That gets banned. Meantime, Malcolm takes you lot off to America to do a tour of America, going around all sorts of weird, wonderful places, clubs, wherever you could get a gig, I suppose. In Texas, they must have hated you and thrown beer bottles at you. What was that experience like?
Well, it was a nightmare, to be honest with you. I get the concept of playing places where the normal rock bands do the circuit. I get that idea, that concept, you know what I mean? It's different places, cowboy towns. But for physically having to do it wasn't much fun. They're just slinging stuff at us. Don't know how many shows we did, but the only one that seemed like a normal show was Winterland at the end. And that's the one where we, called it a day. I called it a day anyway.
That was a brilliant show. I was working for the radio station then, KSAN, that actually broadcast the show. Which was amazing when you compare what happens. So you got the BBC in the UK banning your singles, and there's this radio station in America broadcasting the entire Sex Pistols show live.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And I remember Johnny Rotten hanging around at the end picking up the coins on the stage, and he ended with the Stooges, no fun.
Yeah.
Ever got the feeling you've been cheated?
That's the classic line, yeah.
You don't remember the next day because your Sex Pistols kind of imploded that night. And then the next day you're in San Francisco with Paul Cook. And I've got my little old white Chevrolet station wagon. And I give you a tour around San Francisco in this motor. Do you remember that?
Did you?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
No, I don't.
And then I drove you down to San Jose to a radio station called KSJO. And there was a girl there who'd been the librarian. She'd never done a radio show. She was very sweet and innocent. Her name was Kate Ingram. And they decided, the program director of the station decided she could have a go on air. So the first ever radio show she ever does, you and Paul Cook are the guests. And boy, were you outrageous.
Oh, talk about slinging her in the deep end.
Yes. You were outrageous. Totally outrageous. She handled it very well, I have to say.
Oh, good for her. Well, yeah, I was out of my mind. I didn't know what was going on.
My guest on Sounds of the 70s, guitarist Steve Jones. Now, why did it all go so wrong? Steve, that Winterland gig we were just talking about, such a huge, successful show, was a massive sellout. Surely you could have gone on to more things after that. So what happened?
Well, for sure, we could have cracked it. It just didn't happen. I don't know if that was the plan, and I wasn't told about, or what the truth was. All I know is, for me, I was not having fun. It was no fun at all. That 2 weeks, when you consider, 2 weeks before that we did the Huddersfield gig, and it appeared like we were having a good time. I think it was a bunch of circumstances that kind of led to that. Maybe I should have just regrouped a couple of weeks later, but then we started doing the Rock and Roll Swindle, which Malcolm was pushing at, and it was pretty much a case of, who do I go with, John or Malcolm? You know, and I was closer to Malcolm, to be honest with you. It was simple as that. It wasn't about music or being a famous rock band at the time. You know, maybe that was the wrong choice. I don't know.
Now we've got a retelling of one of the great bands, one of the most influential bands, produced one of the most influential debut albums. Noel Gallagher calls it the best debut album of all time. On the Disney Channel. How punk is that? Have you seen any rushes of the show?
Oh, of course, I've seen all of it. I'm a producer on it. And I love it. You know, you're going to get some train spotters who are going to moan about it. It's not a documentary, see. It's a TV show, and it's based on my book. And I think young people are going to be gravitated to it. It's very exciting. And John comes across good in it. Anson Boone, the guy who's playing John, does a great... All the actors are great in it. And it's, you know, obviously Danny Boyle's no slouch at making stuff. But you are going to get a percentage of people who are just not going to be happy with it. But that's okay.
Why did John Lydon try to stop the Sex Pistols music being used in it?
I don't know. He just didn't want to play along. He claims we didn't tell him about it, which is not true. And, you know, John's John. I don't know. It's a shame. I wish he would have been on board. I'm not into bad-mouthing anyone, and I don't want to bad-mouth anybody anymore. I just want to be positive as much as I can.
Well, it's great speaking to you, and I really look forward to seeing the Pistol series. So you're still doing plenty of guitar sessions in LA, are you?
Not really. No, I don't really care for it, to be honest with you. I just like listening to Steely Dan. It's just music, man. It's just music. You know, you like what you like. Unfortunately, some people have to hide behind an image and don't want to let people know that they like something else. There's no right or wrong music. It's whatever you like listening to.
All right, Steve. Good luck with the Pistol TV series and with the podcast as well. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, mate. See ya.
Take care.